Hi everyone and welcome to Noisebusters. This is the first episode of hopefully many. We hope to bring a lot of awareness to acoustics, noise and vibration. We want to provide a bit of education for those that want to know more, but also talk to key people in the industry about their experience, what projects they're working on and any papers they're developing, but also bring you updates of goings on in the world of acoustics, noise and vibration. I'm Dan Clayton and my Noisebusters partner is George Gibbs. Hi George.
Hi Dan, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate. How are you?
I'm good. It's Friday afternoon, so pretty happy.
Yeah. It's Friday morning here. So just so everyone knows, I'm in Calgary and George is over there in Warrington in the UK.
Yeah.
Sunny Warrington. And we didn't want to get into too much depth on our first episode. It's more about bringing awareness to the show. And we're going to start introducing ourselves, a bit of history of our time in the field of acoustics, and really just set it up for future episodes. So if you want to come on the show and chat about a book you're bringing out, a paper, an article, maybe an interesting project you've worked on, or just a chat about your experience in general, it'd be great for you to get in touch with us. So our email is noisebustersdb@gmail.com, and you can reach out to us. And both George and myself are on LinkedIn if you want to reach out that way. So absolutely no problem. We'll consider all kind of things. So I think we should introduce ourselves, George. Should I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm not sure how far back to go, really.
Right back. All the way back.
All the way back to the dawn of school. Right, when I was 2. No. So...
You went to school at 2?
Yeah, I was ahead of time. You know that. So I guess my acoustics journey, if that's a thing, started when I had a careers meeting in high school, if you remember those things, where you get forced to go and talk to someone about planning the next 20 years of your life. And it was quite interesting, actually, because the person asked me what I was interested in. I was kind of like, well, I like music, maths, physics, that sort of thing. And anything that kind of touches on those three would be really cool. And then she was like, well, there's this degree at Salford that is acoustics. And it was something I'd really heard of before. I was like 15 or something. And it turned out to be something that really appealed to me. So I went to the facility, did the walk round and did all that. It was actually their old facility at the time, and they were moving to this new one across the river, if you call it a river, the River Irwell, dirty place, trolleys and that. But we basically started to look round and it seemed like it really appealed to me. So it had a nice balance of not just kind of mathematics and physics and theory, but it had like practical laboratory kind of investigation work as well. So it was really interesting, and having a musical background, it really just intrigued me. So I signed up for that, went through that, did the placement year that they offer as part of the course, which was really useful. I did training and that placement year at a small specialised acoustics, kind of more building acoustics consultancy in Edinburgh. And it was really useful to have that year's experience when I came out of university to just kind of give me that running start, if you like, coming out of uni. But the problem was the year later was like 2008, 2009, when the recession hit and there were no jobs whatsoever. So it was a pretty slow start to the kind of career, really. So I ended up working in retail a bit, which was great because it gave me that kind of experience to be customer facing, and I'd never done that before. I was always in the dark depths of a kitchen, like shuffling chips around. So it was an interesting thing to kind of push me in that direction. But then like a year later, I managed to get into a small consultancy where we were working on building acoustics projects. So like studio design, small environmental studies for single kind of industrial plant applications and residential uses. So it was quite a small company. So kind of had to deal with a lot of stuff from an early part of my career. So like invoicing, getting clients, developing them, doing the work as well, and reviewing all those sorts of things. So it's quite interesting start. And then a couple of years later, I moved to a larger company that did a similar kind of thing, focusing on building acoustics. So doing more of the bigger infrastructure projects as well, from like schools, hospital design to road kind of infrastructure projects and industrial gas stations and all sorts of things. And then after that, I moved on to the large multidisciplinary consultancy, more of the environmental stuff, which is where I met George, and we did more of a like environmental noise, vibration kind of focus, and it was really the bigger stuff. And I developed a lot there just through the kind of exposure to projects, working on all sorts of things, oil and gas, wind power, transportation. I basically touched everything in that time. And there was a great team around, a very positive attitude, a lot of people wanting to learn, do a great job, which was really cool. Was there for about 6 years and then moved to Calgary in Canada. So uproots and moved to a relatively small consultancy compared to the last two I'd been with. And they have a kind of broad spectrum from building, acoustics, environmental, and it's quite interesting moving away from the UK, where it's very heavily regulated from a noise and acoustics background, to Western Canada, where there's very little in comparison. It still happens, but it's been quite a transition to start to find my way in that kind of environment. So I've been here a couple of years, and it's been good, exciting, and yeah, that's kind of me to a T, really, up to now. So George, your turn. So I guess first I want to really know who your favourite Beatle is.
Ringo.
Of course. Keep it simple.
No question. I mean, the man's a genius. He had the least talent, yet he, is as rich as the other three. So who's laughing?
Exactly.
No, yeah, absolutely love Ringo. It can't have been that good, Dan, because you left to go to Canada. That's not what you told me on your exit interview, but oh well. You went back to being two, but my background, as I can think, is in about year 2000. We used to do at school where you do a list of questions, and it tells you what your profession should be based on your answers. I think it's 50 questions or something. And my best mate who sat next to me, he actually got fence painter, which I thought was like inspired. I think it wasn't quite that bad, but I got volcanologist, and I sort of knew from then that I wanted to work in the sciences. So a bit like you, I had sort of physics, maths background, and my undergraduate I did engineering, but did a general environmental one, which meant I did I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something environmental. So, and environmental covers sort of mechanical, civil, chemical, air quality. Didn't do that much noise, physics, maths, blah, blah. So it did everything. And I sort of knew from that I didn't want to be a general environmentalist. And I left and became a water engineer, and not after doing that for very long. So an opportunity over here we have these sort of a local government regulator. So we're split up into councils, and each council has responsibility to make decisions on things like planning applications and license applications. And quite regularly they have a noise expert, and the job just came up near to where I lived in Liverpool. And I did that for 2 years, and it was absolutely fantastic. And what it meant is that you learnt quite a lot on the job, because of the fact that you had to make comment on, review and evaluate a whole range of applications, from the noise impact of a fish and chip shop to the moving of a dual carriageway, or a huge new freight exchange, building new train stations. It was really, really dynamic and interesting and difficult. A fantastic time. But like you, when the crash happened in 2008, how varied the work was sort of dried up, and I decided to move to consultancy. So moved to the developer side, which is a bit mental at the time, really, in hindsight. But what that meant is that I could then work on the other side, which I think is actually more challenging, and sort of work on some of these big projects. And the company I worked for, we did things like power stations, new road schemes, new rail schemes. What I particularly wanted to move for was wind farms, renewables. That was what I was particularly interested in. And after a couple of years there, I got into that and did that quite a lot for about 5 or 6 years. It was the time that in the UK, wind farm was very big. So I was very lucky to experience that. And obviously at the same time, you joined. And we had a good, how many years was it? 4 or 5 years, maybe?
Just over 5, yeah.
5 years, yeah. And it was great. So I guess I consider myself very lucky that I've worked for both developer and the regulator. Probably found out less so that I've learned more, but more that I've discovered more things that I know very little about. And I think that's the bit that's most exciting about the job. And I think you probably agree, because we still have these discussions now where we just call up and go, what would you do about this? It's never like, oh my God, what would you do about this? It's like, oh, this is quite interesting. How would you approach this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Same as you. I'm still in consultancy now and still focusing on things that I'm passionate and interested in. And the other thing that's great about acoustics, which I think we'll come on and talk about, is that the mechanics behind it, the physical aspects of it don't change. Doesn't matter in which country you're in. A dB is a dB. The bit that changes from country to country is the way we assess it and the way we define it, or the way we evaluate it. And that's the bit that keeps it interesting. That's why these sort of discussions are interesting. It's like, how do you guys deal with this problem? It is really interesting, and it's a proper international subject as well, which is great.
Yeah, I think everyone can relate to it, because even though they might not be aware of it initially, noise especially affects people every single day. If it's just communicating with someone at a train station or trying to get to sleep at night and all these sorts of things, it's so relatable, but yet the general public are unaware of really what's done behind the scenes, and explaining what I do as a job to people that just have no idea. So like even just explaining to my grandmother and granddad that just what I do isn't play acoustic guitar for a living. And it's just interesting to hear people's perspective, and they thought that for a while just because I played guitar. It was like, no, it's not what happens. So it's nice to be able to start this podcast and, video episode as well, to try and bring awareness to people and help them figure out more and digest things like acoustic reports more easily and what's going on, and be more informed generally on the sort of thing. So I think that's my aim. I think that's what we both want to do, and bring more awareness to things like the health effects associated with noise, because I think we're still in the early stages of adopting that as part of assessments and procedures globally. So I think that's quite an important thing that I want to get across and help people with. So
I think I've mentioned this beforehand. This is purely selfish on my part, because I like talking to people about stuff that I want to learn about. And we are at a stage in the career where we have quite a lot of friends in the industry that know a lot about subjects that we find interesting, and we felt that this was a good medium to investigate that, to basically say, can you come on and have a chat to us? Oh, by the way, we're going to film it as well. And I thought, on the off chance other people might also find it interesting. So that's, I say it's purely selfish, this endeavor on my part.
Well, I think both of us, and why the hell not? Like, let's do it. I'm interested to see who comes on. We've got a couple of people lined up to talk, both in the industry and kind of outside. What I think we'll do is maybe talk a little bit about what acoustics is, George, and distinctions between the kind of common areas of that, I think. When I think of acoustics, that's kind of a broad brush kind of sector statement for what we do, and all things like noise, sound, vibration really fit in that subject. But I think when I think acoustics, I really start to think inside. I think like room acoustics, concert halls, the quality of spaces for education and speech intelligibility, those sorts of things, and transfer between spaces, kind of sound, insulation, proofing type stuff, and kind of recording studios. That's what comes to mind for me in terms of acoustics. And when we move to things like sound, vibration, noise, that sort of thing, it becomes more general. I think with the difference between sound and noise, to me, sound is something you measure, and it's the physical quantity that we're measuring, the kind of movement of the waves in air or water, whatever we're doing. And the noise aspect of that is kind of when people find that annoying, and the general population don't really want that kind of sound. So like traffic noise and anything like industrial that they're not really wanting. At the house property line, noise is the unwanted aspect, the kind of subjective kind of interpretation, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And then vibration to me is just things that shake and wobble before it becomes in the air. So like vibration is your earthquakes, your train going past and shaking your house, and that sort of thing. So kind of a general introduction to those three things. And I want to break down some of those things more. So if you're kind of outside the industry and have more questions that you have that want us to cover, please feel free to email in at our email address, noisebustersdb@gmail.com, and we can cover some of that stuff. So, Judge, what do you think about these topics?
I think you described it really well there, Dan, to be honest. Acoustics is just described as the science of sound, and sound is purely the pressure that you hear. And I think you touched on this as well, is that by it being something that you hear, it's inherently subjective because not everybody hears the same thing. And one of the important aspects that we consider is noise, because that is not only the subjective element of what somebody hears and also doesn't like. And a lot of what we do is understanding the likelihood or prevalence of aspects of sound that are unwanted. And that subjective element of how we work makes it more interesting, because unlike some other disciplines where you look at a metric or something and it has a limit, you say you can't exceed that limit, when it does it's bad, blah blah blah. That's great, but what acoustics does, it has that, but also you have to then start to think as how does that limit relate to how people experience it, and what kind of people are you affecting? Are you affecting people while they're working? Are you affecting people while they're learning? Are you affecting particularly sensitive people? And that's the bit I think that makes acoustics a really interesting and dynamic subject, is that there's always this element of subjectivity that means that two people can always have a really good discussion with differing opinions. As I mentioned beforehand, the general principles are the same no matter what country you go to, but the interesting bit is that it's the interpretation and understanding of how those different countries, those different areas, those different people apply that understanding to actual effect.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part of the job, really, I've found over the years, is that we're always applying kind of very general, broad brush kind of, confidence in terms of a scientific testing kind of results and consensus, if you like. But when it comes down, it's very, very person to person. It varies so much. So you can assess loads and loads of things with loads of guidance, and sometimes, people might not still be happy with it. And that makes the job more interesting to me. And I've always got that in the back of my mind to help kind of grow and understand, and just talking to people more about it, if it's the general public or people technically that have had exposure to different sectors more than I have. And it's interesting because I think every situation, every job project, no matter if you're doing like a road project or an air project or whatever, but if you move the project to a different location, you'll probably get a completely different response to noise, because you're in a different location in terms of the people that are around it. So it makes it different every time, even though you're looking at the same stuff. So I find that quite interesting. In terms of what acousticians do, I think, generally what we do as acousticians in my day-to-day job is we assess sound, vibration, and just make sure that we are quantifying the kind of impacts and the likelihood that someone's going to be bothered by this kind of sound that's either going in or is existing, and we're then providing recommendations to treat that or control that noise generally, if we need to, or describe how it's going to be okay and what measures are in place to make that okay. So often people don't know that's even a thing that's been done, but that's a good reflection on the industry probably. So
definitely. In terms of noise, we're generally looking at where somebody's proposing something new that's likely to introduce a new noise or increase the levels of existing noise, or where they're looking to change something where it would, again, increase noise or change noise. And I think that the main things that we look at are when they're introducing a new road, or they're introducing a new railway, or they're introducing less a new airport, but changes to an existing airport. Things like flight paths. They're things like maybe a supermarket's extending its hours, and they're looking at introducing traffic that's occurring during the night time and affecting people. And it's all those sort of noise that some people might not realize that there's quite a lot of assessment work goes into these sort of developments when they're being proposed. And it's not just noise; all sorts of environmental disciplines are considered. But the other aspect of acoustics is the improvement of sound quality. So most of our efforts are spent in terms of reducing noise, but emerging disciplines are around understanding, quantifying sound quality, things like tranquility, and looking at ways at how we can improve it or increase the areas where it is cherished or where it is important. A disproportionate amount of time is spent on it in terms of not enough. And it's definitely an emerging part of the industry. It's something I know that you and I are definitely interested in. And we talk about those sort of developments that I mentioned, sort of transportation developments, is the main bulk of what we do. But acoustics covers lots of industries and lots of developments. And that's partly why we want to do this. We want to talk to people in some of those more fringe or emerging aspects that we want to learn more about. And so that we can look to introduce into how we work.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because like when I was in the UK, that was a lot of what we did. Like transportation noise was a big thing. But like it's crazy, like moving to Western Canada, that's far less of a thing. And it's kind of looked at a little bit, but the kind of guidance and the approach isn't there. Like the main focus is very much industrial energy kind of power stuff. It's very much regulated in like a sector base. And I'll get into this in more detail, but I just wanted to push that kind of out there, that there are differences like across the world. And the UK to me is still one of the leading entities in this kind of thing. And it's exciting to hear more discussions on tranquility and the quality of sound rather than just level and reducing noise from something. I think it's important we start to have that conversation and bring more awareness. And I know we want to talk to people in that field and in that industry to get their insight and help us improve and try and bring awareness to those things. So I think that's something that we want to push for. So hopefully other people want to listen and hear on that sort of stuff as well.
Obviously over here, we are incredibly densely populated. So I wouldn't say that people were more sensitive to change. Any change is more likely to affect a larger number of people. So, a changing of a road scheme, a relatively densely populated road scheme in the UK would be completely different to a relatively densely populated road scheme in Canada. It might be, tens of houses where it might be thousands of houses here. So small changes can have much larger impacts because, impacts aren't just on a receptor by receptor basis. They're judged on the, how many receptors experience that small change. And I think what's happening in Canada, and I know I've seen this with things like renewables, like wind farms, is that they're less regulated because generally there's more space to put them. So when you put a wind farm, you can, there might be a couple of people. So I think that's what drives the regulation quite a lot here is in terms of how densely populated we are, which is good.
Like 10 years ago, it wasn't. 15 years ago, let's say, it was nowhere near the same landscape in the UK as it is now. Not in terms of the assessment procedure, that's kind of developed a little bit, but it's been there in essence and kind of changed names and stuff. But I think mainly the kind of requirement for noise to be considered in many, many aspects of planning kind of things. And that's the main difference here, really, to me, is that there's no kind of overarching person looking at all these different developments. So you do still, it's funny you mentioned the wind farm stuff, is that I've dealt with one recently that you have turbines going up next to houses and people are unaware that it's happening because there's no body kind of saying, yes, you can build a house there, or no, you can't. And they're kind of separate. So it kind of is a little bit dysfunctional. So it's interesting and definitely something I want to dig into more in a kind of future episode. And yeah, I think that's a cool little introduction. Not really scared anyone away, hopefully. So okay, cool. So I think we want to dive into the news now, just a bit of acoustics general news. So I think it's a good time to crack a can. I'm drinking the Siding 14 Pale Ale from here in Alberta.
Oh, very nice.
It's just gone to the afternoon, so I think I'm good to go.
I'm drinking the traditional British San Miguel. San Michael.
You're a sophisticated man. Well, yeah, cheers, George.
Cheers.
So I think the first thing I really want to touch on briefly is Covid-19 and the effects it's had in acoustics, really. And not really just the industry in general in terms of work and that sort of thing. It's more what's happened in the kind of environment and the kind of acoustic environment that we live in. I think to me, there was quite a drastic change when the real pandemic really hit properly and we were in lockdown and not as many people were traveling and that sort of thing, and saw big reductions in things like road traffic noise, aviation noise. I live under a flight path, so that was really noticeable. And then when it's starting to come back now, it's more noticeable that it's coming back. So having conversations are a little bit difficult in the garden, but I live directly under a flight path, so that makes sense. But it just shows how much we've been affected by this. And then doing things like surveys, in my mind, become slightly more difficult, and having projects where atypical noise from road traffic networks, which is probably the most common kind of source in the general urban areas, even rural, depending on where you are, it becomes difficult. So you have to kind of rely on previous work and make assumptions and kind of do that sort of thing. So it's been quite interesting. And the only time I really remember something similar to this was when I was in England and we had that volcano erupt in Iceland and aviation kind of ground to a halt and everything went quiet from the sky. So that's the only time I remember it being similar, and doing surveys then, it's kind of a similar thing, but at least you had road traffic. I think this is a different kind of thing altogether. So what's it been like over there, George?
It's a nice cheery subject to start on, Dan.
Yeah. That's why we're drinking. Yeah.
It's probably much the same as you guys. I mean, I didn't want to sort of dwell too much on the negative stuff because there's been quite a bit of positive stuff that's come out of this. Yeah. The industry has been really asking questions, mostly along the lines of two main themes. One of them is to do with the logistics of what we do. So we do a lot of site work, and obviously with restrictions in terms of travel, accommodation, safety whilst on site. The COVID-19 has meant that the way we would usually do work or usually go to site is severely affected, not least also that we can't actually get into the offices where we work. So the way people working is remotely, and you've got these remote teams where you're sharing stuff over networks, and it's been incredibly challenging. But that's not unique to the UK. And also what isn't unique to the UK is the technical aspects. So not only the logistics, but obviously COVID-19 means that by us not being able to go to site, we also can't undertake surveys which we use to validate things like our models. And what that's led to is a lot of questions or thinking around, do we really need to do that in terms of what we do? How important is it? Are there different ways in terms of how we obtain data, use data, present data? And some of the positives is there's been big moves forward in terms of GIS. Over here very recently, there has been a large development that has used what's been called a digital EIA, which is basically an environmental summary report, but it's digital. So rather than being the reports that people maybe are more used to, which is sort of a PDF Microsoft Word document, this is actually something far more interactive. So, rather than you scroll through it and, you scroll down to section 7, scroll all the way down to section 8, it has things like maps that you can click on, and it takes you to the information in different sections, and it's just far more interactive and far more user-friendly. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the thinking behind that has been accelerated because of COVID-19. And also the other thing that is a positive is our understanding of change. So it's very difficult. You get what we call is noise creep here, or sound creep, whatever you want to call it, is that, developments would add a tiny bit of noise onto the previous development, and it'd get larger and larger and larger. And you actually don't notice the the tiny changes. But by having something like COVID-19, means that everything sort of goes back to the absolute baseline. Things drop, and we can really get a better understanding of what level of change is occurring because of developments. I'm aware of studies in terms of noise impact on biodiversity, things like, I suppose a good example is things like shipping lanes. So they know that with huge reductions in the use of shipping traffic means that some of the migration paths of species change, which implies that the shipping, the use of shipping lanes and also the noise that comes from them must have an effect on how species migrate, travel, etc. And I think that is another one of the positives that has come out of this, is the ability to learn about the change that's occurred. But there's far more bad things that have happened, but I suppose we're just trying to put a bit of a positive spin on it.
It's interesting. Like, you can't just look at it with a bad light. I think you've got to try and make the most of it. And I'm sure people are doing loads of innovative things to try and get around these issues that we're having. And I don't know, I'd love to hear from people, to try and maybe comment below and let us know what they've been doing and how it's affected them, and maybe how the noise is affected in their area. Or I think it's just interesting to see all these things kind of come up, and I think it's important that we look at the changes that are happening, and how long it will take to come back to normal, who knows? And things might be different for a long time. I don't know, but I think we could talk about this all day. So I think let's leave it there. Okay, so the next article I wanted to talk about is I've been diving into more of the ecology world, which is something that interests me personally, but I haven't really done a huge amount of stuff in acoustics with it. Kind of fed noise levels to ecologists, but that's kind of where it stops for most of us. And what I came across was an article in New Scientist, and it's basically, there's a recent study being done, and it was by Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. And basically what they've done is adult bats can change their social calls by imitating modified calls. So they played kind of different calls at these bats and treated them with mashed banana when they got it right. And they've actually found that this has changed and they can learn these things. So there's a few animals that can do this in the natural world. We can, obviously. I default to some crazy accents sometimes. Then there's whales, dolphins, seals, and elephants, apparently. So quite interesting article. So I just wanted to touch on that to try and dig people into that kind of stuff going on in the more of ecology world. I don't know if I'd be too enticed by the banana stuff. I'm not that fond of banana. I'd probably go for like, pale ale or something. That's probably what I would go for. How about you, George? San Miguel? Yeah.
No, I love banana.
Good to know. The next article that I came up with was...
Well, no, it's really clever. I mean, it must be to do with something to do with either, it's either mating or avoiding predators or to identify prey. But I have to admit, when you were first talking about it, the first thing that came to mind was a parrot. Which it's slightly less menacing when you're thinking about a parrot just saying, "What are you doing?"
That's what you train your parrot to say.
That's literally what I was thinking about when you were talking about it. I was thinking, I wonder if that's why a parrot does it.
Maybe.
But yeah.
I forgot about parrots. Yeah, weird that whales and dolphins were the first thing that came to mind.
It was all the sea animals you mentioned. It was whales, dolphins, and elephants.
Elephants. I don't get that. Yeah. But apparently they do. Who knows? The next article that I came up with was basically there's a new kind of study gone on. What they've done is put the same singer in different acoustic environments and seen how they kind of approach and change the way they sing based on what environment they're in. And I sing a bit kind of on the side and noticed that this is a thing that I kind of do subconsciously and maybe not acoustically, because the places I normally sing in are like pubs or clubs and normally have terrible acoustics anyway. But it's more like when there's high noise environments and you start to learn to use different parts of your kind of sensory system. So you use like internal sound for staying in tune when you can't hear yourself singing through like PA systems and stuff. But this is interesting in that they've shown that singers actually adapt and change when they're put in different, like more reverberant spaces, say, and they can actually change, and it depends how much of the direct sound they're hearing, and can actually adapt and change. So it's quite interesting study, really, I find. So I think
I assume that's good singers, because I'm interested that that you do that, Dan.
Yeah, well, thanks, but it's yeah, no, it's like, you know, operatic soprano type singers, and yeah, they can actually do it quite well, and I imagine they have to do it anyway. And I don't know if it's becomes natural or you have to train to do it. I guess just exposure and doing your 10,000 hours or whatever it's called to become an expert in it. I think it's interesting. So I just wanted to bring kind of a highlight to that. There's 3 different worlds of acoustics that are going on, and if anyone has any insight or any other articles they want to share, we'd be happy to hear about them. So I think that's a good way to sign off and really leave it, George, as our first episode. I think it's been a good little introduction, hopefully, and people have found it useful. So I really hope that people can put a comment, share the video if you feel that's something you want to do. And if you're listening on the podcast, it'd be great if you could rate it, leave a review, and maybe subscribe. And if you feel that you want to come on the show and talk about something that you're working on, or just tell your story, I'm quite interested to get some of the old fellows of the Institute of Acoustics on to talk about some of their stuff over their careers. I think that would be really cool to get kind of insight over the way things have changed over the last 30, 40 years in acoustics before our time. I think that'd be really cool. So if you know anyone or want to pester anyone to come on, feel free to do that and email us at noisebustersdb@gmail.com, or find either myself or George on LinkedIn. I think that's about it. George, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's great. I'm going to continue with my drink, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Yeah, cheers everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Cheers.